Let's open up the new TVC figure of the classic A New Hope Stormtrooper. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there. Thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. I'm really excited today. I finally got my hands on the new vintage collection classic A New Hope Stormtrooper. This one is VC231. It showed up in very limited quantities at a local New Zealand online retailer. We managed to snag this one and also the A New Hope Darth Vader that's brand new, VC334. I opened that one up just recently. I'll have that review linked down below in case you want to check that one out. But I was so excited to get a hold of this one. Now, I do say new, but of course, fans of the vintage collection line will be familiar with the fact that this is actually a reissue. This is an older number, VC231, but there is a couple of aspects to this backing card that I think do make it worthwhile picking up for collectors. So, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take the figure off the backing card so we can take a closer look at all of the sculpting and details. But first, let's take one last look at the packaging and of course the differences here. I have a couple of other carded figures here just to help illustrate a few aspects that make this backing card kind of interesting. Over here I have an original vintage Kenner carded Empire Strikes Back Stormtrooper, and we can see just how much the new Hasbro TVC line takes inspiration from the Kenner figures. We have the same promo image there of the two Stormtroopers blasting behind the carded figure, and we also have the same red color behind the figure and for the nameplate, and we even have the same white font that just reads Stormtrooper. It's really fun just to see how closely these look. I do wish I owned a New Hope carded Stormtrooper figure. I think that that would be amazing. In this household, we are very nostalgic about this particular figure because it was my husband's very first Star Wars action figure ever. He got the A New Hope Stormtrooper as a family gift, not this one obviously. He played with it as a child. He was very happy to have a carded example for our collection, but yes, it is so nostalgic for us, so we really like this one. So one of the talking points particularly about this new carded figure, I call it new. This is VC231, which is an older number by now, but if we compare it to one from this similar sort of numbering point, this one is VC275, you will see that we have some differences here. So this one is the reissued VC231. We can see that we have that classic Leia and Luke artwork here. On the original version of the backing card, which I sadly don't have on hand, that's why I'm using this Boba Fett one, we can see that the warning logo was over the Luke and Leia artwork here on the corner. On the new reissue of this Stormtrooper card, we have an uncluttered print here of Luke and Leia, and the warning box has been moved down to the bottom. On the original Kenner cards, there was a little bit of safety text underneath. It says meets or exceeds all safety requirements of product safety, so it kind of makes total sense to have the warning box directly underneath the Kenner logo on these ones. In the past, the warning box was up here, the Kenner logo was here with nothing else underneath, so this reissued version of the card is, I think it's a step up and improvement. We also see that on the Darth Vader card that also came out. This one is obviously brand new, VC334, and again we have that nice uncluttered Luke and Leia artwork there and the warning box all the way down at the bottom. So even if you have the original VC231 Stormtrooper, if you are a Minton card collector, I do consider this to be an upgrade, and I think it just looks cool, and you may consider it to be an important variant if you like to collect all of the different variants of the packaging. Of course, one of the big variants is, of course, if I flip these around and then we can see from the back. The new style of backing cards has this big colored block here with a picture of the backing card and the figure. The original version of VC231 had a backing card like this, black with the other figures from that assortment, which is of course a reference to the style of the back of the original vintage cards like that, black with those colored boxes with some of the other figures that Kenner was obviously hoping that you would buy to collect them all. Some collectors may like this because it more closely resembles resembles the vintage style. This one is very different, and again, the new Vader card also had that new style. But if you are a completionist, you like your collectible variants, this one is so very different both at the front and of the back of the backing card that I consider it to be a separate figure. I do think it's funny that we share the same number, because technically the action figure itself is the same, but there is so much difference between the backing card styles, particularly when we turn them around to the back, that I think it's worth picking up if you do like to collect carded figures. For me personally, I wish I could keep this one carded, but you might be able to see we have that unfortunate kind of scratching where this has been pressed up against another carded figure. You can kind of see where the paint has lifted here. So it's not a mint example. It certainly would not be the best to keep this one carded. I am hoping to find another one to keep carded, because this one has that unfortunate kind of scratching into the paint where it's been pressed up against another action figure bubble. A bit of a shame, but I am very excited to get this one off the backing card. The original assortment that VC231, this original Stormtrooper, came in, that assortment never made it to store shelves here in New Zealand, so we don't actually own the original VC231 Stormtrooper. So we're very, very excited to have this one for our collection, and I'm hoping to find another one to keep carded, because I think that backing card is just absolutely stunning. But enough about the cardboard. Let's get the action figure off of the bubble, get him out so we can take a closer look at the details. So now I have the Stormtrooper figure and the blaster rifle accessory out of the packaging, and we can take a closer look at the details. And the first thing that I obviously have to point out is the fact that this figure is technically not accurate to the A New Hope as it is packaged. With Rogue One, we were introduced to a slightly more sort of upgraded Stormtrooper in terms of the costume detail, which included a ribbed undersuit, which we can see here. In the original trilogy, the black undersuits worn by Stormtroopers were just flat black. They kind of looked like leggings when you saw them behind the knees and things like that. From Rogue One, and certainly in The Mandalorian, we have sort of more added detail in terms of the ribbing. We also had, in the original trilogy, the blue tube stripes on the helmets were painted in Rogue One and forward. These are actual indents, more like vents. So we see that on the Black Series figure. Here on the TVC scale figures, these are not indents, they are still painted on, so the helmet does still match what we see in A New Hope, so I like that there. But yes, if you are a real stickler for accuracy, you will see that these lines where the undersuit is visible are not quite what we see on A New Hope, but I do really like the overall accuracy and proportions of the modern era Hasbro TVC Stormtrooper. We've seen it actually reissued a number of times within the vintage collection line, certainly in the modern era. When we think back to the original trilogy, we generally only see Stormtroopers, and we do have Sandtroopers as a variant. Once we hit The Mandalorian, we got a lot of variants of these Stormtroopers, which I guess probably made Hasbro very happy. We have Incinerator Troopers, Artillery Troopers, Remnant Troopers, all basically using the same base Stormtrooper armor with different painted effects over the top, different markings. We have yellow, red, we have the weathering of the Remnant Trooper. So for collectors, you were probably very familiar with this base sculpt Stormtrooper now anyway, but we'll check out the articulation and the paint details of this particular figure, just in case something really stands out. I like the paintwork on the helmets. We've always got this really fine detail. I'm really impressed with what Hasbro can do with the sort of new era of digital printing. We get some really fine details. I've got a little bit of a black line here where the paint has just kind of webbed away from the end of the stripe there a little bit. And there's a tiny little bit where the very dark green lenses has kind of just bled onto the white around the lower bit of the eye. So tiny paint flaws, but as I mentioned earlier, this one sold out so very, very quickly. I was happy to grab one, as it were. I bought one online because they sold out very, very quickly, so I wasn't able to check the paint job in person, but generally speaking, with Stormtroopers here in New Zealand, because they are perfect for army building, they always sell really fast. So for me personally, I'll take what I can get. I'm not too mad with the overall paintwork. I have seen worse. Always a little bit of a shame when you get a brand new figure that you're very excited about and you can notice a few small paint flaws there. I have seen certainly worse in person at the store, But yes, this helmet is not removable. We don't have a sculpted head under there like some of the new modern clone troopers that we can either put a helmet on. We can't sort of swap this for a head. It would be kind of interesting if they did sort of like a twofer and put like a Luke or Han head underneath here. I really want to see modern versions of them. I know the proportions on those characters are a little bit different to the standard Stormtrooper, but I would like to see those in the new TVC line available here locally in New Zealand. I think that they would be fun to add. Now, I'm checking out the articulation of the arms. I like the way that the shoulder bell armor fits underneath the shoulder straps, so we can get the arms up pretty well. They don't feel too rubbery. Some of the clone trooper armor is very squishy because of the size and scale of it. It hits at the shoulder, so it kind of bubbles up when you move it. Now, some of the joints I find on some of these newer figures can be a little bit stiff when I first get them out. So I'm just going to see how well we can sort of move these ones around. Because, of course, I like to pose my iconic Stormtroopers with a two-handed grip on their E11 blaster accessory. So that requires us to get the hands fairly close together and close into the body. So you can see with the articulation, we can get those hands pretty close together. I'm hopeful that we can get a nice pose there. We can rotate this hand so that we've got a bit more of a cup shape to get underneath and hold the barrel, and this one has a trigger finger. We'll hopefully be able to hold onto that blaster nicely. Quite an extended figure here, which is very nice. You don't really need to wrestle them into position. This one is just a little bit wonky. I'm definitely going to have to play with his legs to get him standing up straight. Sometimes when you get them off the backing card, they're just a little bit askew. I do like the posing options here at the sort of upper chest here. It fits very nicely under the armor. I do really like the efforts Hasbro has done to kind of hide the articulation points, and Stormtrooper armor works pretty well for that. We've got articulation here at the hips. This one swivels very easily, actually. You can see the rubbery belt boxes there. When I move that, they kind of get caught, but they flex out of the way pretty easily. I like the scale of these. They're not too big. You can see just how flexible they are. Of course, we also have a holster here, which is very rubbery as well. So I'm hoping, and I can even kind of squish it. You can see that it is hollow, so that we'll get the blaster rifle in there as well. It's very squishy. That sort of feels funny. On at the back, we have the thermal detonator accented with gray points here. The paint on this side is a little bit splodgy, goes a little bit wider than perhaps I would like, a lot tidier on the other side. It is on the back where I'm not really going to see it once it's on display, but of course I do really like to see tidy paintwork on my figures that I'm especially excited about. On the back, predominantly this figure is made out of white plastic. You can see on this piece here, the black paint hasn't gone all the way up to where the back piece is. So there's kind of just this echo of ridges there that are still white. It's a little bit of a shame there, but overall it looks pretty tidy. We've even got some very tidy little dots there on the ab plate. Gray and blue, which are accurate to A New Hope. Later on, Stormtroopers have slightly darker ab plate buttons, certainly within the Mandalorian as well. So figures that are specifically for the Mandalorian tend to have different colored ab plate buttons there. Looking at the rest of the articulation, sometimes they're like almost too articulated. I can see that we have that sort of swivel point across the top of the leg, but because the hips are so flexible, this is just turning at the hip there. So I don't even really need that extra articulation point there. The knees on these figures, I do get a little bit anxious about. They can be a little bit tight to start with. So you can see them there. Even the little articulation points still have that ridged articulation there, which I think sometimes contributes because it's kind of a little bit grindy because of those sort of hinges there have that ribbed detail to it there as well. So it's not smooth plastic, so I feel like I can sort of feel it kind of grinding there. I do wonder how that would stand up to play if you were to give this to a child. I'm just going to be posing mine on the shelf, so he's not going to get too worn in that aspect. We have black on the underside. He has a little bit of a shallower peg hole there. I do like to put my 3.75 inch action figures on clearer stands. I have noticed the modern figures have quite shallow peg hole stands. It makes them a little bit hard. I'm certainly going to experiment with perhaps a few different suppliers of clear stands, or perhaps I'm just going to be spending some time shaving them down, or because I really don't like gluing action figures to stands. It's a very, very last resort for only the most flimsiest of figures. So overall, because this is the same sculpt as many other Stormtrooper figures that we've got from The Mandalorian, it wasn't too much beyond what I was expecting. Just a few little paint niggles there, but on the whole, pretty much as I was expecting. Looks pretty good. Let's test out his posing. We've got a pretty standard E11 blaster here. It's in pretty much plain black, and hopefully he's going to hold this nicely. I do like the scale. Oh, this blaster is a little bit more bendy than perhaps I've seen. Okay. He's got very tight little hands. I do like figures holding their weapons well so they don't lose them at the drop of a hat. But sometimes it does make posing a little bit tricky. Okay, I gotta spend some time with this one. His figure extends quite well, so it does fit into that trigger point, but it's not going all the way through. I'll probably, as always, spend a bit of time getting him just right before I add him to my display shelf, but he holds that pretty well. Doesn't feel like it's going to go anywhere anytime soon. And I'm just going to see if I can get him to, yeah, wow, he holds that really well. It just kind of slips there into his hand. I like to see that Hasbro knows how people are going to pose their Stormtrooper. That didn't really take much wrestling at all. I think he looks pretty cool there. Pretty classic Stormtrooper pose, kind of holding the blaster rifle at the waist there. Just going to very quickly put this into that holster there. We'll see how well this is going to fit in. I'm hoping the rubbery texture means that this will fit in fairly well. A little bit of a tight fit, and that goes in about there. So you can see it just kind of sticks out the bottom. We can just see the end poking out there, but that looks pretty nice. I do think they look a little bit odd without something to hold. I do think they look a little bit better on display with the blasters in their hands, but you've got options there. So I've got a couple of other figures that I just want to quickly compare this particular Stormtrooper to. In particular, I have on hand the classic white Stormtrooper from The Mandalorian, specifically the Imperial Stormtrooper from Navarro Cantina. This was the deluxe box one that came with the big E-web blaster. So this one doesn't have a holster and he doesn't come with an E11, so it is a little bit different there. But the main points that I wanted to just sort of show were just looking at the paint work, particularly on the belt, as I mentioned earlier, because this one has A New Hope, so it is gray and blue dots. This one here is pretty much all, I want to say it's either very dark gray or full black. So we've got a bit of a difference there. But on the whole, I am expecting these two, just at a cursory glance, to be pretty much exactly the same. We have that same rubbery sort of belt boxes there. Obviously this one doesn't have the holster on it. I kind of feel, I wonder if they have two different sculpts or they simply, yes, they are different sculpts, because I can see the thermal detonator is different on these two figures. So at least the belt is different. The way they've sculpted it, we've got sort of an inset here. We've still got the sort of knob at the top, but this one is sculpted very differently. So very fun to see those side by side, and it is definitely worth, if you want to add Stormtroopers to your original trilogy displays, to have this version, because technically this one is not going to be accurate because of those buttons. But if you struggle to get this one, ones from The Mandalorian are probably going to be just as fine, because on the whole they are going to be the same. We've even got the black feet at the bottom. Everything else looks pretty much identical. So now I finally have the new reissued VC231 A New Hope Stormtrooper to display alongside my brand new A New Hope Darth Vader VC334. I think they look absolutely fantastic together. Hasbro's really doing some fine work with the vintage collection line recently. I'm hoping I find the rest of the classic A New Hope figures from this line, in particular the Princess Leia with that double hood option, hood up and hood down. In the preview, that looked absolutely fantastic. I'm really hoping I can find that one available locally soon. And of course, I'd hope to find another Stormtrooper. They look cool in packs, you know, army building, especially with Lord Vader. And of course, for the mint on card fan, I just hope to find one with slightly better backing card so I can keep it carded, because I think it just absolutely looks fantastic on that new backing card with that warning box moved so it doesn't interrupt the art on the top of the card. I think this looks fantastic. I'm really happy with what Hasbro is doing with the vintage collection line. Wavered a little bit over the years, but I think we're in a really strong era, and I'm really happy to be able to add these two to my collection. They look awesome together. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars figure and had a lot of fun at checking out all of the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a TVC fan, I also took a look at the new Darth Vader figure, VC231 3.75. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.